Hi, everybody. Thank you very much for the invitation to talk at Inspire FC Grassroots Football Conference. My name's Gareth Long. I work at a place called ACPE, the Australian College of Physical Education, on the Sydney Olympic Park. And my session today will be playing games to improve your players' 1v1 skills. So I thought I'd just give a quick overview of my background. My background is in physical education, teaching and coach education. And I consider it myself very lucky to have been a PE teacher, because it meant that early on in my coaching career, I was getting hours and hours of opportunities to make mistakes, hours and hours of opportunities to work with children and young people. I've also always coached. I've coached in adult football. I've coached in academy football in the UK. And before I moved to Australia, I had a job with the English FA, which basically meant that I was going around English Premier League clubs and English Football League clubs, supporting their coaches who worked in schools. Here in Australia, I'm a technical director of a club, and ACPE are partnered with Liverpool International Football Academy, and I have the pleasure of helping them with that initiative as well. But most importantly today, I'm also a grassroots coach at the fantastic club called Glebe Wanderers, where we have fantastic people like Gary Twowes and a team of coaches and volunteers that really support the boys' development. So I've been at this club, or this team, I've had my team since under sevens, and we're now moving into under 13. So like many of you, I think I spend my time developing football practices, supporting boys in games and training, but probably spend most of my time helping kids put on bibs and tying up shoelaces. I also thought it would be useful just to give a very quick visual representation of my DNA. These 12 boxes are what currently guides my coaching practices with my under 13s. And I say my, as people will probably recognize that they're heavily influenced by the English FA's how to coach DNA, but also I've tweaked it so that it matches my own coaching philosophy. And I thought it was worthwhile having that, so that as we go through this presentation and I present a couple of ideas around 1v1 practices and games, you can kind of see where I'm coming from in terms of what I believe effective coaching to be in the grassroots space. So as the title suggested, we're going to be looking at 1v1 skills. And I chose this deliberately because I think it's really important that we try to work with grassroots players' individual skills. And also potentially it's an area that we often overlook. We often assume that players already have these skills, or that they're going to do it outside of our training sessions. And of course, we have a responsibility to develop a team as well. So I have a sneaky suspicion that sometimes these 1v1 skills, despite being really important, as Johan Cruyff would attest, I have a feeling that sometimes these may get overlooked. So that's what I'm going to base the presentation on today. And if you're not convinced by Johan Cruyff, I'll give you a quote from Sir Alex Ferguson, where he said, "We won all our 1v1 situations, and that's why we won the game." And again, a point I want to make early is that we need to recognize that players have different 1v1 skills. Of course, there are players that have the ability to beat players, but equally players that have the ability to protect the ball in 1v1 situations and evade players to make a pass in 1v1 situations are really important. So what I'm not going to do through this presentation is say this is the way to teach 1v1 skills, but rather that we recognize that our players will have certain strengths, certain weapons, and perhaps if we can identify them, then we can build on those in our coaching sessions. The other thing that I think is really important as we go through this presentation is for us to realize that I don't know your players. So I don't know what their likes are. I don't know what they need. I don't know their characters and their personalities and what motivates them. I don't know their positions, their height, their gender, etc., etc. So as you listen to the rest of this video, have your players in mind, so that when I say something, you can be thinking, yeah, I think that would work with them, or I might need to make these tweaks, these changes. I'm also very conscious that we are not one-on-one coaches. We have a team. We have, I don't know, anywhere from 6 to 20 players turning up to our sessions. So it was important for me to consider, well, how can we incorporate 1v1 coaching when I've got 6 to 20 players coming up on a cold Tuesday night? Now I'm going to outline 2 games that I've used with my players. And I've chosen these 2 games. I'm going to do one now and one at the end. I've chosen these 2 games because the kids enjoy them. And there's some features in the games that I think the kids enjoy in terms of competition, some novelty, opportunities to play against different players, different mates. And also I think they provide us a framework in which we can coach and we can observe our players and begin to identify where their strengths are and how they can build on those strengths, and also perhaps some areas for development. So the first game that I'm going to show is, I call Control the Middle, but you'll have better names for it. I never come up with particularly good names for these activities, but we'll call it Control the Middle for the sake of this presentation. I recognize that it's unlikely you have a whole field to train on. So I'm going to work on the premise that you have a quarter of a pitch or a similar size. I've done all these activities in smaller sizes than this. Now, I'm also going to use an additional space, but this additional space could go in the middle of that first rectangle there as well. But I've just put it to the side so that we can see it a little bit better. So we're going to have, in our main area there, we're going to have 4 fields. But again, you'd have as many as you need for 1v1 pitches. So we've got 4 1v1 pitches there. And then on our smaller field, we have 4 players competing in a 1v1 pitch. So we obviously need a ball for each field. And we need our players lined up in a 1v1 challenge. So we can see there that every player has in the main rectangle, has a goal to defend and a goal to attack. Okay, now clearly I don't have that many mini goals, so I'm using cones, but equally I'll be more than happy to use a line to attack, but more about that later. So we have our goal to defend and goal to attack. So that's how we set up, and this is how the game works. So the aim, the challenge for all of the players is that they want to try to earn the right to play on that smaller pitch, to compete in the 1v1 game. And of course, we've got 4 players in there, but we could have 3. That would work just as well. You could even have a smaller 1v1 pitch. But that's our top pitch, our champion pitch. And as I said, all players want to try to get on there. On that top pitch, that championship pitch, players play against each other. So in the example, you can see players have 3 goals in which they can score, and they're defending their own goal. Every time they score a goal, they earn a point, and players will accumulate their points. They don't lose points, and they will keep their own score of how many points they earn during the game. The players on the bigger pitch, the outside pitch, as I said, they want to get in there. And this is how they do that. Or this is how these are my rules. And you can change these as much as you want. So players doing the 1v1 in the main area, my rule is that they have to score 2 consecutive goals. So that doesn't mean they're going to win 2-0. Well, they would mean they win 2-0. Wouldn't mean that they win 2-1 or 3-2. They have to score 2 consecutive goals. When they do that, they shake hands with their opponents, They leave their field and they join the championship pitch, but they choose someone to replace them. So one of the champions they choose, and the champion will leave their pitch and go and play that person's original partner. And again, that game starts again, must score 2 consecutive goals. So what we're getting in this is obviously we're getting lots of 1v1 games. We're also getting different challenges. We have a 1v1, and then we have a, like a playground game, really, 4 players competing with 1 ball. And also, one of the reasons I love this game is players play against different people. One of the problems sometimes when we do 1v1 is you might be working against the same opponent for 10, 15 minutes. And that's great, but the solutions, the problems that you face tend to be the same. So if you're playing against a right footer or somebody that's got a particular trick or skill that they use, you might solve that problem. You might find solutions to solve that problem, but then you're not facing different ones. So by mixing up players, our players will get lots of different challenges, and the coach doesn't have to do anything here. So the coach can observe and coach more than organize, which is a reason I like. And again, of course, you can work out different rules for different pitches. So it may be on one pitch, you might have 2 players that haven't gone in the middle yet. So you might say, right, okay, first goal to be scored on this pitch and you go up. So you can manipulate it with your players. So that's the first game that I'm going to show, called Control the Middle. And I'll come back and show another one towards the end. Now, also, it's great as coaches to set up motivating, challenging activities that stretch our players. But of course, that's only part of our role. We probably also want to provide some support and help in terms of some of our coaching points and what we see. Now, what you see on this slide here are just aspects to do with the attack element of 1v1s. And that's all I'll talk about in this presentation. But of course, we have opportunities to talk about the defending elements of 1v1. So if we have some information about the types of things that we want to see, and I'm not going to read all of the ones on the slide there, then that will begin to help us observe. So we've set up our game, we've explained the game, the kids are playing, now we can observe. The game will run itself. We can observe and we can see which of these things individuals or players are doing well, and which of these we might need to focus on a little bit more. We can, of course, use these to ask questions. So it might be a timing when a player moves from the championship pitch down to a 1v1 pitch. That might be a time where we'll ask them one of those questions. And of course, we might provide coaching points as we're going. We might provide feedback as we're going along, watching that game as well. But it's difficult. It's difficult to provide feedback and observe all 16 players. We had I think 12 in that visual, but 16 players. It's difficult. So there might be other ways that we can be quite clever with this. And one of the ways is that we might set challenges for our players in these 1v1 activities, or even let players select their own challenges. And if we're really brave, we might set challenges and let players select their own challenges in games on match day, as well as in training. So what we've got here is we've just got 4 examples of challenges that we might set or allow our players to choose. And we might have some different levels. So again, we recognize that our team have different needs. They're at different levels. So we can still try to support all our players without expecting us to observe all 16 and provide feedback to all 16 and ask questions to all 16. So we might even have a few written up on a whiteboard, and it may be that we get the players to tick when they have met one of the challenges, or maybe when they've done the challenge a few times, so that we know that they're becoming consistent in it. Another method that I've enjoyed using in the past as as a way of involving parents and parents understanding what we're coaching that week, is I might get the players to secretively choose a challenge, and then I might get the parents to observe a player, generally not their child, but observe a player, and the parent has to guess which challenge that player is attempting. And of course, a lovely part of this is the players being able to sign, tick, tell you, the coach, tell the parent that they have completed their challenge. So I'd like to move on a little bit to get us thinking about or things for us to consider when we're designing 1v1 games. And a recent article I read, which was around making our coaching representative, making it realistic to the game of football that your players play. I thought made it quite simple in that it broke it down into 4 elements. Okay, so if we're trying to design 1v1 games that are representative and realistic to the game of football, the 4 things that we consider is it needs a ball, so that's easy. Our considerations around that are probably not too hard. We will have a ball in a 1v1 game. We may occasionally have a decision to make about the type of ball that we use. Okay, we might use a futsal, we might even use a tennis ball, but generally we're going to be using the ball that the players are going to play with on match day. The second bit, we need an opponent or opponents. And again, that might sound obvious, but there are things that we can do to make it more representative or to consider, and we'll come on to that later, but it may be who the opponent is. We've already talked about changing opponents to give different problems. So we might think about how we match opponents. It might just be random, might just be varied. We might match up similar abilities. We might match up similar size. So we've got the actual opponent, the number of opponents. Although we're talking 1v1, it might be a 2v1, 1v2. We've also got the position of the opponent, which we'll talk about more in a minute. The third point that this article made was around direction. Okay, so if we have direction in our 1v1 practices, it's more likely to be representative of the game. And it might be multiple directions. We're not always traveling towards the area goal that we're attacking. But generally, if we have direction or multiple directions, rather than just a 1v1 practice where there's no end point, we may have more chance of producing a realistic activity. And that links to the final one, which is consequence. There should be a consequence if we're successful in our 1v1 or if we're unsuccessful in our 1v1. So again, we'll talk about this in a minute. If we can get past the player or we can shield a ball, what do we do next? What's the consequence of being successful? Equally, if we're unsuccessful, we lose possession, we're tackled, we dribble the ball out. What's the consequence there? Okay, what does the defender then have to do? Okay, rather than the opposite of that would be the attacker losing the ball, and then the defender just has to give the ball back to the attacker, and the attacker has another go. That would be less representative. So we've got these 4 areas, and we'll dig into this a little bit more. So in terms of direction, a question we can ask ourselves is, where on the pitch does it take place? Is it like this example here where we're heading in the direction of the goal, we're facing a defender and we're attacking the goal? We have a 1v1 and there's not many people around us. Or sometimes, as we said earlier, we may not be facing the goal that we're attacking straight away. So in terms of direction, we may need to move in an opposite direction or a sideways direction. We may not even be able to head in the direction of the goal. We may have to pass to somebody else who can then head in the direction of the goal. So you can see here we've got a 1v1 wide, we've got a 1v1 central, and of course we may have 1v1s in other areas of the pitch, like close to goal. So in this example, we are facing the goal, but it's probably going to be a tighter area. It's probably going to be quicker decisions. So when we're designing, my purpose for putting this slide in is just to get us thinking. If we are going to design 1v1 practices, a good question to ask ourselves is, where do I think this 1v1 is going to take place on the pitch? What does it look like? If the floodlights failed and we're in darkness and we shone a torch onto players in a 1v1, what would it look like? And that's an important question that will help us design 1v1 activities that are representative and realistic. And also thinking about direction and consequence. Another question, in addition to where does it take place on the field, is what happened before the 1v1? Which actions preceded it? Is it a tackle? Is it a chase for the ball? Is it a pass or interception? So again, I think this is important questions for us to consider, because then we can use this realism, we can use these actions as a way of starting the 1v1 games, the 1v1 activities, rather than what we might normally do is a player starts with the ball, the defender is away from the ball and they go. Okay, that might be fine, but maybe we can be cleverer in making our activities reflect what happens on match day. So tied in again with this direction and consequence, if we're thinking about where on the pitch and we're thinking about the actions that precede the 1v1, when that happens, we can start thinking about, well, where's the defender? What's the start position? Are we receiving the ball with the opponent in front? Are we receiving the ball with the opponent directly behind us or diagonally behind? Or are we receiving the ball with the opponent at the side of us? And of course, you know, I suppose we could even start thinking about, is the ball on the floor? Does the ball need to be brought under control? But let's stick with these three things at the moment. It's most likely in a game that we're going to experience all three of those start positions, with defenders in front of us, behind us, to the side of us. But probably if I reflect on my own coaching, I probably typically started with the opponent in front, the opponent facing. But increasingly, you know, I've questioned that. I thought, well, that's not always the case. So therefore, when I'm designing 1v1 games, that shouldn't always be the case, that the start of the game is the defender facing their opponent. And again, thinking of the consequence, if we're successful, okay, what type of moves might be appropriate for what we're trying to achieve? Okay, now, of course, we will have some of these that we want to teach our players, and our players will come with many of these already. So we have that balance between which ones of these are we going to show, demonstrate, and maybe encourage players to use, versus which ones are we going to let the players come up with. Okay, which ones are we let you know, what percentage is us demonstrating and telling, and what percentage is the players creating and coming up with their own. So look, there's four situations there, and I'm not going to read those out, but in a 1v1, we might want to go past an opponent, and there might be some moves that are particularly appropriate for that, and our players may have strengths in those. We might be able to beat a player by just shifting the ball and shooting. And again, there might be certain skills and moves that will help us do that, or help our players do that. We might want to change direction and then shield the ball, protect the ball. Again, there might be some moves that are particularly useful for that. And we might want to turn away from our opponent. And as you can see, there are moves there, and there'll be loads of these lists. And I suppose my advice here is to strike that balance between ones that you as a coach can bring to the table and ones that your players will already have and that they will bring to the table. So if we know where on the pitch is it happening, what's preceded the 1v1, as the 1v1 starts, what's the position of the attacker and the opponent, then we might have an idea of which moves are appropriate. Because we know certainly that players bring skills knowledge to the coaching sessions, and they can learn moves away from us. They're not relying on us. They are also using YouTube. They're also probably playing FIFA and working out new moves from that. They will learn from their mates and their peers and from watching football on the TV. So we know that players can learn moves away from us. So why not create a 1v1 skills list, skills book of your players? You know, which ones do they already have? Which ones can they do? Name them after your players, you know, rather than the Ronaldo chop, it might be the Wilco Doyle spin. It might be the Ty Gillies drag back. And if we can produce these and have an understanding of the skills that our players already have within our team, then perhaps they'll act as role models for others in their team. Perhaps it can act as a home learning resource and create our 1v1 moves book for your team. And if we're going to consider, well, what happens before the 1v1, then one of the consequences is, well, what's going to happen after the 1v1? If we just have 1v1 practices where as soon as they beat a player, it ends, again, we can ask ourselves the question whether that's as representative as it could be. So what happens after the 1v1? Is it that a player will run with the ball or dribble? Is it that a player might evade a defender and shoot? Or pass after the 1v1? So again, I think these are really important things for us to consider as we consider designing 1v1 games and activities. And I think if we consider these, it helps us with the design and helps us think about things like, well, how can players score in 1v1 games? It may be like in this picture here, that they are attacking a line, attacking an end zone, or even attacking a gap between two cones, two markers. It may be that we want them to evade an opponent to find a pass. So in this example here, they might their consequence, their outcome might be to find a target player, to find a teammate. It might be that we want them to hit a target. So again, this might represent a pass after a 1v1 action or a shot after a 1v1 action. It may be that we want them to score a goal. So escape a defender and score in a goal without a goalkeeper or with a goalkeeper, against the goalkeeper. It may be that we want them to have a choice of ways to score. So in this example, there are two goals that they may score into, but it might equally be cones to knock over or two gaps to attack. So again, if we're thinking about the consequence or what happens after a 1v1, it helps us in our design of activities. So as a summary, okay, these are 6 aspects that we might think about before designing a 1v1 game. Probably the first one is the most important. What happens in your games? What are the 1v1 situations that your players are involved with? Hey, you'll recognize that through obviously watching your team game, watching your teams play. You might not be fortunate enough to have a keen parent who's videoing the games, and you may not have time to go and watch those and analyze them. But another strategy that you can use that I found really powerful with players is actually taking photographs of the game. And if you can take photographs where it captures the 1v1 moment, or players where there's that battle, that challenge, then use those photos to help design your activities and show the players why you're doing what you're doing this session. So what happens in your game? And the rest are recaps, so I'll go through them quickly. Where on the pitch does the 1v1 take place? What are the likely starting position of the attacker and the opponent? Which actions precede the 1v1? What moves might be useful? And what are the likely end products? So again, having these in mind, I think has certainly been useful for me. So that might look like the slide that we had a couple of minutes ago. It's not. Everything's changed. Everything's different. But the reason I've put that in there is to reinforce what we've just been saying about we can design 1v1 activities in very different ways, and we can design them in different ways because we've considered some of those questions. But also to make two other points. One, there's no reason why we can't have the same setup, but actually our players are working on different things. Okay, so that again, that might relate to what they need, what they're strong at, might relate to the positions they're playing next week, but they can all be doing the same game, but actually be working on different things. And the second point that I want to make here is that we can use the same setup the following week. Sometimes we feel a bit under pressure to have to change our coaching sessions from week in, week out, because the kids might get bored and they need variety. But actually, we can use the same setup as the previous week, as the previous 2 weeks, but actually use it to work on a different element of 1v1. So this is the my final game that I'll show. So we had control the middle at the start of the session. This one's called gold, silver, bronze. But again, I'm sure you can come up with a better name for it, but I'll explain the game. Again, same area of our field, but this time we've got 3 areas outside the field, just small areas with cones. They represent gold, silver, bronze, whereas I'm thinking it could be Europa Conference, Europa League, Champions League. And all the players would start in the bronze area. So all the players are in there. We have a number of, as many 1v1 fields as we need within our area. And again, how they score is entirely up to you. We've got our players, and obviously we've got our ball for the 1v1 field. And this is how the game works. All the players, as I said, start in the bronze circle, and they pair up and they go off to a 1v1 field and they play. And they play according to the rules that you and your players have agreed. In my game, it's the first player to score 2 goals. So not 2 consecutive this time, it's just first to 2. Or get a panna or a nutmeg and they can win outright. But like I say, use whatever rules you like. At that point, when we have a winner on the field, the winner that game ends, so games are ending at different times on the fields, but when a game ends, the winner would go to the next area. So they would have won a bronze medal, and the winner will go and stand in the silver circle. The defeated player goes back to the bronze circle. Okay, they go back to the bronze circle and they wait there, which is probably a matter of seconds before somebody else enters their circle. And when someone else enters their circle, they go off and play that person on a spare field. So the balls are left on the field. So if I'm standing in the silver circle, one of my teammates comes in the silver circle because they've just won their game, we will go off and play. And my friend who was waiting in the bronze circle will wait until someone enters the bronze circle. In my silver game, if I win that, I've collected a silver medal and I go into the gold circle. And the player that I've defeated, notice I'm always winning these, the player that I've defeated will go back to the bronze circle. So, and at the end of a set period of time, how many bronze medals have we won? How many silver medals have we won? How many gold medals have we won? But again, we're playing with lots of different people. Also, this game will kind of differentiate after a while, and you'll end up playing with people with a similar ability. So thank you very much for listening to this presentation. It's quite a quick, but hopefully you've had an insight into how we can organize 1v1 games for the whole team, so everybody's involved, but also some of the considerations that we can go through. So in this game here, we can obviously change start positions. We can change the way that we score. We can change the position of defenders, how the 1v1 actually starts. So even in a structure like this, we can change it as much as we want. And the final thing that I would like to say is, if you would like some more support in this area, then the Australian College of Physical Education have designed an online coach education course called Developing Players' Abilities to Attack and Defend in 1v1 situations. And essentially, it does a lot of the stuff that we've gone through there. It gets you to think specifically about your players and their needs and begin to plan coaching activities to support your players in 1v1 situations. And you can find that course by going to Open Learning and searching. I think if you just put football in the search bar, then you will come across that course. However, please, if you have any questions around anything around grassroots coaching, I was about to say around developing players 1v1 skills, but anything around designing activities that you think will motivate, inspire, challenge, put a smile on your players' face, then please reach out to me at that email address that you can see there, and I would love to hear from you. Once again, thank you very much for the invite. I think it's a brilliant initiative to have a conference for grassroots coaches and to have such amazing other speakers to learn from is absolutely brilliant. So well done to everybody involved in putting this conference together. Thank you very much.